Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. It's Funmi speaking, the principal attorney at the law firm. Today's video, we're going to be looking at E.L.F Cosmetics. So I want to take a see one, the privacy posture for this organization and if they have a cookie notice of sorts. We're doing a series on the channel right now. We're looking at cookies for different organizations. I'm going to scroll down and see if we can find some insight into their cookies. It looks like it appears on the privacy notice, so let's click that. So upon landing on their site, we've been presented with the typical cookie banner. I think what's interesting is that we have two buttons, reject all or allow all. But we can also adjust the preferences at the cookie settings section here. So this particular preference center is powered by OneTrust. Now, OneTrust is a third-party vendor that organizations can utilize in order to help them manage the cookie consent given by consumers when they visit the website. Now, there's lots of other different third-party consent management platforms. If you're an organization and you are looking at bringing on a third party to help you with your consent and you're looking for legal advice, you can take a look at my description below and book some time to speak with me, and we can talk about what your organization does, what types of goods and services you provide, and which consent platform is best for your company. So I always opt out all of the cookies that are not strictly necessary. Now the definition is going to vary based on your organization. This language that you see here, this is generally something that the organization can discuss with the third-party vendor. And so what happens is, I don't know what E.L.F Cosmetics is doing. This is just me looking at the website as a consumer. Generally, OneTrust will provide lots of different options to their customers like E.L.F. They'll ask questions like, what type of cookies do you have on the site, etc., etc. This language you can tweak yourself as an organization depending on what you consider to be strictly necessary. This language is not something that is preset by OneTrust. This is something that's determined by the organization. So they're in control of it. The other thing I want to mention for this particular video is when you're working with a third-party management system, they don't draft your privacy notice or your cookie notice. So it's your responsibility as an organization to make sure that what is being displayed by your third-party consent manager is what is displayed on your website too. And if you've watched any of the other cookie policy or cookie notice audits that I've conducted on this channel, you'll see that sometimes both notice and the consent preference center doesn't always necessarily align. And the reason is because some organizations utilize third parties like OneTrust. The third party will do their part in terms of managing the consent preferences, but the organization fails to update the cookie notice that's relevant to this particular insight and pop-up that we're receiving. So I'm going to opt out of all of these. And what I expect to see is we can see that E.L.F Cosmetics talks about utilizing strictly necessary cookies, functional, performance, and then also they want to obtain consent to the sale or sharing of personal information or targeted advertising. Now, this particular disclaimer that we see here, this is something that is very US-centric, and we talk a lot about geography on my channel because geography influences what an organization does from a data privacy compliance standpoint. Now, in the United States, there's an obligation under certain US privacy laws that requires organizations to give consumers the opportunity to opt out of the sale or sharing of their personal information. Now, this terminology, sale or sharing, there is a very specific definition of what this constitutes underneath the law. Organizations need to understand what their obligations are. This is not sale in the business sense of sale. There is a very specific definition of what constitutes a sale under the data protection laws that businesses need to be aware of. If you are looking for privacy counsel to help you interpret what might constitute sale or sharing under the respective data protection laws, you can visit my website, www.thedataprivacylawyer.com, and we can schedule some time to discuss what your obligations might be if you are an organization that provides goods and services in the United States. Okay. So I'm going to confirm my choices like I always do. And what I've been doing is, because this is a privacy notice, I'm going to, one, scroll to the bottom of this website to see if there's a specific cookie notice. And if there is not, then we will be taking a look at the specific provisions within the notice that address cookies. Now, one of the things you might see with a lot of organizations like E.L.F is they will cover cookies within the privacy notice. And you as a consumer might be asking, oh, why is it that they've put cookies within a privacy notice? Why didn't they have a specific cookie notice. Now, every organization is different. You can talk to your privacy counsel about how you want to structure the notice that you provide to your consumers. But ultimately, a cookie in and of itself, it identifies an individual. And under the data protection laws, it's considered personal data, okay? So sometimes organizations will reference the cookies in this notice because this doesn't just cover cookies in and of itself. It'll cover all other pieces of information that identify an individual. We're not going to do the rest of the privacy notice. We're only going to look at cookies today. I'm going to scroll to the bottom and see if there's a specific cookie notice. If there's not, we'll just look at the provisions in the privacy notice. Now, a notice is basically insight into what E.L.F Cosmetics Inc. does with data, right? Generally, these are not asking for your consent. They're not saying, oh, can we have your consent to do this? It's saying, hey, these are our privacy practices. This is what we do internally. And we're sharing that with you, our consumer, in order to comply with our obligations under the data protection law. One of the main tenets of privacy laws is that an organization needs to provide notice about its privacy practices, which is why you'll see every single website should have a privacy notice at this stage. There should be no excuse. Organizations in 2025 must have a privacy notice if they process personal data. And I've talked about this severally on my channel. If you are an organization and you have just one customer, the fact that you have one customer means you process personal data, because whoever is signing the invoice from your customer is likely putting their name and email address at a minimum on that invoice. And both of those pieces of information identify the individual, the customer behind the organization. So everybody processes personal data. There's no excuse not to have a notice in this day and age. Okay, so there is no specific cookie notice. So we're just going to do a control find. And we can see here that there's cookie and traffic data. There's 62 references to cookies. So we're going to look through those. Okay, online browsing. So this chart is really helpful for consumers to understand. I'll scroll to the top and we can see what each column references. But there's a column here that references the personal information we collect. And I spoke about this before. Cookies are personal information. How E.L.F Cosmetics uses the personal information, and then the legal basis. In another video, we'll cover legal basis, but I'll just give some insight right now. Whenever an organization like yourself is processing personal information, you have to have a legal basis. It's one of the first things that you should do. If you're conducting any processing activity, so an activity that requires you to use information related to an individual, you need to have a legal basis. There's several that you can choose from. Some of them that are referenced in E.L.F Cosmetics is performance of a contract or legitimate interest. But if you're going to conduct any type of processing activity under the data protection laws, you need to have a legal basis. Now, that can be something you can discuss with your legal counsel, which one is appropriate for you. For the purposes of this particular audit, we're looking at cookies. So according to E.L.F Cosmetics, some of the identifiers that they collect through an individual's use of the website, mobile applications, and communications, which may be through cookies, right? The legal basis they're relying on to conduct this processing activity, which is processing cookies, is consent. So they have two legal bases here, consent and legitimate interest. Now, legal basis is a concept that is very Eurocentric. Now, that being said, a lot of the US privacy laws are now referencing having a legal basis to process personal information. It's explicit in the European Union, but if you look at US privacy laws, they allude to these legal bases to rely on. A lot of the organizations that we cover on my channel are global organizations, which is why you'll see things like legal bases. It really does depend the geography that you operate. Let's say, for example, you are in Nebraska and you're headquartered in Nebraska. If you only sell your services to Nebraska customers, your obligations are probably limited to Nebraska data protection laws. So you need to understand and get insight from your privacy counsel on what are my obligations for the goods and services I sell in Nebraska. Now, that's just an example. What I really wanted to cover here is the usage, right? One of the other tenets of data protection laws is making sure that you have a purpose for the personal data that you process. You always have purpose. We've talked about purpose here. The purpose for them utilizing the cookies is obtaining identifiers through an individual's use of the website, mobile application, and communication. and they obtain this information for browsing behavior to ensure that the website or mobile applications are secure and safe. So they've listed what the purposes are for them utilizing the cookies, and they've obtained the legal basis as well, consent and legitimate interest, which are two of several other legal bases. Now, if you're not sure what any of this terminology means and you want to speak with a privacy lawyer, you can take a look at my description below, and I would love to speak with your organization. So we've already covered the online browsing. We're also looking at location information. I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about location. There have been developments in data protection laws on how location data can be processed, specifically if it's precise geolocation information. And I've also talked about on this channel the level of sophistication in technology and how organizations are utilizing particular identifiers within the business. Generally, I think it's important for businesses to be cautious about processing location information. Now, it depends on how your business uses the cookies. It appears here that location information may be obtained through the use of cookies for E.L.F cosmetics. So I'm presuming that they have spoken to their privacy counsel on what best to do if they're going to be processing this information, and on what basis, what purpose they're relying on in order to process this particular information. Depending on the geography where your organization offers the goods and services will determine what types of restrictions are placed on you when you process location information. So I just wanted to mention that as well. So let's keep looking at cookies. Okay. Certain cookies and web beacons that we employ are necessary for the operation of our website. Other cookies that we employ are not necessary for the operation of our websites, but are employed to enhance your use of our websites and shopping experience. Okay, so they've listed them here. Now, one thing I think is very interesting is when we were first presented with the cookie banner, the preference center discussed strictly necessary, functional, and targeting. Now, there are a couple others here like functional and social media. This is why it's very important for organizations to make sure that they verify what their third-party vendor that facilitates the preference center is placing on the website for consumers to see, in addition to their updates that they make to their notices. Make sure that you're taking a look at what cookies you're displaying on your notices are aligned with what your third-party vendor facilitates from a preference center perspective. That's very, very important. We use third-party advertising companies with your consent if you're located in the EEA, European Economic Area, or the United Kingdom that use cookies to serve advertisements across the internet. Now, I love that they've made the distinction. We talked about Euro-centric privacy notices, US-centric privacy notices. The reason why they've made the distinction that they rely on consent in the EEA or the United Kingdom is because this is required under the data protection law in Europe, right? For this particular activity. Every time your business processes personal data, it's considered one specific activity. The activity here is utilizing cookies and using third-party advertising companies to serve advertisements across the internet. This is one processing activity. Now, E.L.F Cosmetics obviously does many processing activities, but this video we're only focusing on the utilization of cookies. This is not the only activity that utilizes cookies by E.L.F. That's why it's really important for consumers to really read these notices. So I really hope you enjoyed this particular cookie notice audit. Again, this is a privacy notice, but we're really looking at cookies because I think that businesses have really grappled with the fact that they need to have a privacy notice, but cookies are receiving less attention. And it's really important for you to recognize that cookies are personal data and your business has an obligation to protect that information under the requirements of the data protection laws. I hope you enjoyed this audit, and I'll see you in another one.